Check just about any poll on the subject and you'll find that Bernie Sanders is among the most popular politicians in the United States. He mounted a surprisingly powerful primary challenge against Hilary Clinton in 2016 and is very likely to run again in 2020. There are numerous challenges Sanders will face as a presidential candidate, and I'll go through a more comprehensive list of objections to his candidacy in my next video. But in this one I want to focus in on one criticism he seems to face more often than any other, or rather three wrapped up in a single phrase. The criticism that he is an old white man. On the face of it, he clearly is all of those things, but so has been, it seems to me, the vast majority of presidential candidates throughout the history of the country. So what exactly is to be inferred by this criticism? We might be tempted to think as an old white man he doesn't care about minorities. We might think he has lived a privileged life. Perhaps we are to believe that he doesn't appeal to young people or people of color or to women. So let's think about these implicit claims. Are they true? So the criticism that Sanders is an old white man contains three superficially innocuous and true claims. He's old, he's white, and he's a man. So let's start by focusing on the issues surrounding his age.
And again, Bernie Sanders is 76 years old. Is that the road they want to go?
To be clear, Bernie is old. At 70 years old, Donald Trump was the oldest person ever to be elected president for a first term. That record used to belong to Ronald Reagan, who took the oath of office for the first time at 69 years old.
I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit, for political purposes, my opponent's youth and inexperience.
Reagan still holds the record as the oldest president ever, having left the White House after serving 2 terms at the age of 77. If he serves 2 terms, Trump would, of course, beat that record and leave office at the age of 78. Bernie is currently 77 years old, and should he win the 2020 election, would be 79 years old when he takes the oath of office. He would be 87 years old at the end of 2 terms. So if he became president, Sanders would be the oldest ever, and he is the oldest person considered to have a serious chance of winning in 2020. But to be fair, he's not that much older than 2 other early favorites for that same election. He's 5 years older than Trump and just 1 year older than 76-year-old Joe Biden. But if the great poet Aaliyah has taught us anything, it's that age ain't nothing but a number. So let's probe a little deeper. Why is age a concern? One potential problem with an older person serving as president is mental fitness. There are protections in place in case a president becomes mentally unfit while serving in office. In particular, Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which allows a VP and a majority of sitting cabinet to eject a president from office should they be unable to discharge the powers and duties of that office. But you still don't want to elect a president who is at high risk of being thrown out for this reason. Since the goal of nominating a candidate is to pick someone who will go on to win the general election, it seems logical to me that for the Democrats to select Bernie Sanders, they need to be reasonably convinced that he appears to be at least as mentally fit for the office as the current president, who he will likely be running against. I don't want to assign any credibility to the rumors that Donald Trump shows signs of having low levels of literacy or dementia or any other form of mental incapacity or instability. But to be sure, his mental state has been called into question by multiple observers.
President Trump is fighting back against allegations that he is working with a diminished mental capacity, that he is somehow unfit.
Do you now believe that the 25th Amendment should be invoked?
Oh, yes.
Did I think he would ever get help? Because I know he's mentally ill. I know what mental illness looks like.
Rod Rosenstein last year suggested secretly recording President Trump to expose chaos in the White House and enlisting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment.
Not only do we have even more evidence now that Donald Trump would not pass a basic literacy test.
The president says, as a matter of fact, he's a genius, and a stable one at that.
Again, I don't want to assign any credibility to this kind of speculation, I just want to point out that it exists. In contrast, as far as I can tell, the mental faculties of Bernie Sanders have never been challenged by anyone with a sliver of credibility. And there's not even a vague hint that he may not be with it. While Donald Trump has on repeated occasion gone on strange Twitter rants, replete with misspellings, poor grammar, and randomly all-caps words, Bernie tends to communicate in a consistently professional manner. While Trump has changed his mind on fairly significant matters of public policy, Sanders has to this day remained remarkably consistent throughout the years and decades. To be clear, I do not mean to assert that Trump's Twitter rants or flip-flops suggest mental unfitness, but to the extent that others have claimed them to be signs of that, I just want to show that Bernie cannot be accused of the same. This demonstrates that public perception would hold that Bernie is at least equally, if not more, mentally stable than the current president. Physical fitness is another potential issue with age. I could talk at length about the widely reported claims about Trump's strange thoughts about exercise, his 2-scoop ice cream policy, or his apparent frequent consumption of burgers and Coke. But this really gets into gross tabloidy territory, in my opinion. I'm not going to do a comparison of their BMIs, it's kind of low, so let's just skip to the point. What if Bernie were to die in office? This is obviously a serious concern with any president, particularly an older one. It was a very serious concern with the sick and disabled FDR, as he ran for his unprecedented third term in 1940.
A date which will live in infamy.
Because his health was at very serious risk, his VP pick became a serious issue for party insiders. FDR would opt to drop Henry Wallace in favor of the less controversial Harry S. Truman as a result. Now, I don't think anyone could reasonably argue that Bernie's age puts him at a greater risk of death than FDR was running for a third term. So the same solution should suffice. His advanced age should not disqualify Sanders from running, it should simply make his choice of running mate a more serious concern than it would for a younger candidate. The only other potential issue with age is support from younger voters. Someone could argue that he's old so he doesn't appeal to young people, but if they did, they would be just about as wrong as you could ever be wrong about a discernible fact.
And if you move the 9 in there, you have 19.
In a head-to-head matchup against Trump from March of 2018, public policy polling found that Bernie has a base of support versus Donald Trump 55% to 39%. Among voters under 45 years old, Bernie's support jumps to 61 to 62%, whereas with voters over 65 years old, Bernie and Trump are at a virtual tie. This indicates that Bernie's support, at least relative to the president, is strongly rooted in younger voters. And this has been a long-standing pattern, as back in 2016, he enjoyed remarkable support from the youth vote. As the Washington Post wrote at the conclusion of the primary season, it's hard to overemphasize how completely and utterly Senator Bernie Sanders dominated the youth vote, even winning more than 80% of their votes in some states. In fact, during his run, Sanders received more votes from young people under the age of 30 than both Donald Trump and Hilary Clinton combined. Needless to say, Bernie's age doesn't appear to have affected his appeal for young people. Now, having addressed the age issue, let's talk about the white man thing. It's true that every president in American history has been a man, and all but one have been white. And actually, Obama was half white too. So if you want to say that it would be nice to have a woman or a person of color, it would be nice to have some diversity, that would be a totally fair and decent thing to say. But to say that a presidential nominee cannot be a man, that's sexist. To say that the candidate has to be a person of color, that's racist. I'm not an opponent of affirmative action, but whatever you think of affirmative action, the idea of applying it to the top job in the most powerful country in the world is quite simply bizarre. Barack Obama did not receive the Democratic nomination because of racial quotas, and he was nonetheless treated with suspicion and malice by many. Can you imagine just how much vitriol would have been thrown his way if a better candidate was passed up on racial grounds? It would have undermined his presidency, and rightfully so. The fact is, women and people of color are able to compete for the presidency. They often have more hurdles to overcome in life because of their gender or race, but to give them a fighting chance, we don't need to say white men are illegitimate. I count at least 2 women and at least 2 people of color in strong contention for the nomination in 2020. Let's not illegitimate their potential candidacies by saying white men should be disqualified. And by the by, on the race issue, Bernie Sanders is white, but he's also Jewish. He's the son of a Jewish immigrant from Poland who came to America in 1921. Bernie was born in Brooklyn in 1941 and grew up in relative poverty. It's hard to imagine that he never faced any kind of discrimination throughout his life, and it's a little problematic to characterize his ancestry simply as white. All racial categories are baseless oversimplifications. But it seems particularly strange to label a Jewish person who grew up during the Holocaust with the same identifier we use for the tiki torch wielding crowd in Charlottesville who chanted "The Jews will not replace us." Obviously, I'm not trying to argue that Bernie isn't white. Society has generally agreed to include Jews in that category, but in identifying Sanders as a white person, let's not make the mistake of thinking Bernie doesn't know what it means to be othered or discriminated against. He is from a minority group that has faced obscene levels of dehumanization and brutality during his own lifetime. There may also be an implication that, as a white man, he doesn't care about the issues of people of color, and nothing could be further from the truth. As a college kid, Bernie Sanders joined CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, in 1961, and within his first year helped to lead a 15-day sit-in at a University of Chicago administration building to protest the fact that off-campus buildings owned by the university were refusing to rent to black students. As chairman of UC CORE, he penned an editorial in the student paper, the Chicago Maroon, which encouraged his fellow students to help hold the administration's feet to the fire concerning promises made regarding housing integration. He would later take the fight to the city of Chicago and organize a protest in the fall of 1962. In the same student paper, he would later encourage students to keep pressure on Howard Johnson after the arrest of 12 CORE demonstrators for trying to eat at a location of the restaurant in North Carolina. In 1963, Sanders participated in the March on Washington, and not long after returning to Chicago, was arrested on a charge of resisting arrest and fined $25 for protesting segregation at a Southside Chicago school. Just to put this all in context, it wasn't until 1966 that MLK and the SCLC would take the civil rights movement north to Chicago to work on segregated housing.
The real estate agent said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have anything listed." And then soon after that, we sent some of our fine white staff members into those same real estate offices, and the minute the white persons got in, they opened the book. "Oh yes, well, we have several things. Now, what exactly do you want?"
Certainly Sanders was not a major figure in the civil rights movement, but he was clearly a very active participant for a number of years, long before anyone would reasonably think that he would have half a chance of becoming president of the United States. So his early activism demonstrates that his commitments to racial equality are very sincere. So the classification of Sanders as a white man has two problems overall. It has potentially problematic implications about his experiences and his beliefs, and it is totally irrelevant to his legitimacy as a presidential nominee. The only way him being a white man could be a real problem is if his identity meant that he would not be supported by women or minorities. Sure enough, during his 2016 primary run, Clinton showed stronger support among women and people of color. But is it true that women, Latinos, and blacks would not support him in 2020? Well, let's actually look at his approval ratings and support among these demographic groups. According to a Harvard-Harris survey, Sanders enjoys 58% approval rating among women and a 55% approval rating among men. A public policy poll did a head-to-head matchup of Sanders versus Trump. While the poll found that Sanders would beat Trump among men 55% to 44, among women, Sanders is favored 60 to 35%. So obviously his support amongst women is stronger than his support among men. When it comes to race, in a head-to-head matchup against Trump, Sanders has a small deficit among white voters. Trump leads him among white voters by 3%. Among Hispanic voters, Sanders leads Trump 68 to 24. With the black vote, he leads him 92 to 6. With other races, he leads 76 to 13. So Sanders' support amongst minorities is actually stronger than his support amongst white people. On top of that, Sanders' support versus Trump is actually stronger amongst minorities than that enjoyed by Kamala Harris or Cory Booker. So clearly, Sanders enjoys a lot of support from people of color, women, and young people. His age doesn't seem to pose an existential threat to his candidacy, and he has a long history of fighting for disadvantaged people. So when the media criticizes Sanders by calling him an old white man, we really have to think critically about what is being said. It seems unlikely that they would bother repeating this talking point if they just mean the superficial categorization on its own. Clearly, we're meant to read into the smear and believe things about him beyond the banal claim about his age, race, and gender. So when you hear or read about this concern, take the extra step to identify what insinuations are being conveyed. Then ask yourself, are they true?
And you see, you can't talk about black freedom without talking about redistribution of wealth downward. But he hit that issue, and black folk began to listen and say, dang, he's on to something. But the other side is the neoliberal network coming from the Clintons. You got black churches, you got black radio folk, you got black professors. Their careers tied into this next job.